The mezzanine groaned beneath my boots as I climbed the metal stairs. I'd warned them twice about this structure. The bolts were loose, the support beams sagging. But nobody listened to Walter Granger anymore. At 58, I was just the old guy who'd been running physical operations for 15 years. The platform shuddered as I reached the top. I was checking the inventory count when I heard the first crack. Metal screamed against metal. Then everything gave way. I plummeted 12 feet, my back slamming into a concrete pillar. Pain shot through my spine like lightning. Around me, twisted metal and scattered boxes created a disaster zone. I couldn't move my legs. "Help!" I gasped, but my voice was weak. 20 minutes passed before anyone found me. The EMTs arrived, asking questions I could barely answer. Where was management? Where was Arlen, my boss who dismissed my warnings? As they loaded me onto the stretcher, I caught sight of security cameras. Everything was recorded. The EMT checked my pulse. "Sir, we need to get you to the hospital immediately." As the ambulance pulled away, I stared at the warehouse ceiling through the back window. 15 years of loyalty, and this was how it ended. 3 days later, I was lying in my hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness from pain medication. The doctor said I had 2 herniated discs and would need months of physical therapy. My back felt like someone had driven a truck over it. That's when the courier arrived. "Walter Granger?" he asked, holding a thick envelope. I signed with a shaky hand. Inside was a termination letter, effective immediately. No phone call, no visit from HR, just cold, corporate language about restructuring and budget cuts. They offered a severance package, but only if I signed a liability waiver stating the accident wasn't their fault. My hands trembled as I read the waiver. They wanted me to agree that my 15 years of warnings about that mezzanine meant nothing, that my injury was just bad luck. A nurse peeked in. "Everything okay, honey?" "They fired me," I whispered, still staring at the papers. "While I'm lying here with a broken back." She frowned. "That doesn't sound right." It wasn't right. But something told me not to sign anything yet. I folded the papers and slid them into my bedside drawer. I needed time to think. Back home a week later, I sat in my study surrounded by old filing cabinets. My back ached with every movement, but I had to find something. Somewhere in these files was my original employment contract from 15 years ago. I pulled out dusty folders, searching through performance reviews, safety reports, and training certificates. Finally, at the bottom of an old box, I found it. The original contract signed in 2009 when the company was smaller and actually cared about workers. I flipped through the pages slowly. Section 12B caught my eye. Any employee injured due to company negligence while performing duties shall receive compensation of $250,000 in addition to full medical coverage and continued benefits. My heart pounded. This clause was worth $250,000. I grabbed my reading glasses and read it again. The language was crystal clear. If the company's negligence caused my injury, they owed me big time. I thought about that mezzanine, my repeated warnings, Arlen's dismissive attitude. Then I realized something else. Arlen had only been with the company for 3 years. He'd never seen the old contracts. He probably had no idea this clause even existed. I smiled for the first time since the accident. The next morning, I called the main office and asked to speak with Arlen Blackwood, my former boss. His secretary put me through immediately. "Walter," his voice was cold. "I heard about your accident. Very unfortunate." "Arlen, I need to discuss my termination and the circumstances of my injury." "There's nothing to discuss. We offered you a generous severance package. I suggest you take it and move on." I leaned back in my chair, testing him. "What do you know about Section 12B of employment contracts?" Silence. Then, "What are you talking about?" "The negligence clause, in my original contract." More silence. "Walter, I don't know what game you're playing, but current contracts don't have any such clause. You're mistaken." Perfect. He had no idea. "Arlen, you might want to have legal review my original contract, the one signed in 2009. "That's impossible. All contracts follow current standards." "Check your files," I said calmly. "Look for Walter Granger, hired January 15th, 2009. Then call me back." I hung up, knowing he was probably scrambling to find my contract right now. But he wouldn't find the original. I had the only copy that mattered. 2 days later, I sat across from Margaret Chen, a labor attorney who specialized in workplace injury cases. Her office was small but organized, with law books lining every wall. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Tell me about your situation," she said, pouring coffee. I explained the mezzanine collapse, my warnings, the immediate termination. When I showed her my original contract, highlighting Section 12B, her eyes widened. "This is legitimate," she said, examining the signatures and dates. "And they fired you while you were injured?" 3 days after the accident, while I was on pain medication. Margaret leaned back, a slight smile crossing her face. "Mr. Granger, do you have documentation of your warnings about the mezzanine? Emails, work orders, maintenance reports? I keep everything." "And they offered you a severance with a liability waiver?" $75,000, but I'd have to admit the accident wasn't their fault. Margaret shook her head. "With this clause, they owe you $250,000 without any waiver. Let's see if they try to lie about this." She grabbed a legal pad and started taking notes. "First, we need to gather all your documentation. Every warning, every email, every maintenance request. Then we contact their insurance company." "Their insurance? Mr. Granger, you're about to become their biggest nightmare." That evening, I fired up my old laptop and logged into my work email. I still had access. Apparently they'd been too rushed to cut me off properly. I searched for mezzanine and found exactly what I needed. The email was dated 4 months ago. I'd sent it to Arlen, copying the maintenance supervisor and safety coordinator. "Urgent, mezzanine platform safety concern. The support structure shows signs of stress fractures. Recommend immediate inspection and reinforcement." Arlen's response came 2 hours later. "Walter, the platform was inspected last year. It'll hold. Tell maintenance to focus on more pressing issues. We can't shut down operations for every minor concern." I printed the email thread. Then I found another one from 6 weeks ago. Follow-up, mezzanine safety. "The platform is visibly sagging. I strongly recommend we restrict access until repairs are made." Arlen's reply was even more dismissive. "Walter, stop being paranoid. The structure is fine. Tell your team to get back to work." 3 warnings total. All ignored. All documented. I leaned back in my chair, wincing as pain shot through my back. They thought they could fire me and sweep this under the rug. They thought I was just some old-timer who'd go quietly. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next week, Margaret and I met at her office to review my evidence. I brought boxes of documentation spanning 15 years, work orders, safety reports, maintenance logs, everything I'd kept because I believed in doing things right. "This is impressive," Margaret said, flipping through files. "But I noticed something odd. The digital maintenance logs from the past year, they're incomplete." She was right. I'd checked the company's database. Reports I'd filed about the mezzanine had mysteriously disappeared. Convenient for them. "They deleted the digital records," I said. "But I kept paper copies of everything." Margaret held up a work order from 3 months ago. "Platform inspection requested, emergency priority." My signature was at the bottom, along with the date and timestamp. "And here's another one," I said, pulling out a duplicate. "When the digital system went down, I always kept handwritten backups." Margaret smiled. "Old school methods for the win. They can delete computer files, but they can't erase what you wrote by hand." I spread out more documents. Incident reports, safety concerns, maintenance requests, all signed, dated, and ignored by management. "Arlen probably thought he was clever, cleaning up the digital trail," Margaret said. "He didn't count on someone who kept real records." 15 years of habit, I replied. "My father always said, if it's not on paper, it never happened." My old colleague Dave Martinez called me that afternoon. He'd worked in facilities maintenance for 12 years before retiring last month. His voice was concerned. "Walter, I heard about your accident. That's terrible." "Thanks, Dave. It's been rough. Listen, I need to tell you something. I also warned Arlen about that mezzanine, multiple times." My pulse quickened. "When?" 2 months ago, I filed a formal safety report. The bolts were loose, the support beams were cracking. Arlen told me to mind my own business and focus on my own department. This was gold. A second witness who'd warned management about the exact problem that caused my injury. "Dave, would you be willing to provide a sworn statement about what you told Arlen?" Absolutely. That platform was a death trap. I'm honestly surprised no one was killed. Can you meet with my attorney this week? Just tell me when and where. After I hung up, I called Margaret with the news. She was thrilled. 2 employees warned management about a specific safety hazard. Management ignored both warnings, and then the hazard caused exactly the injury you predicted. That's textbook negligence. What happens next? Next, we contact their insurance company. Companies hate paying claims, but they hate lawsuits even more, especially when the evidence is this clear. Margaret wasted no time contacting Pinnacle Industries Liability Insurance Company. She sent them a formal notice of claim, including my contract, the email warnings, and Dave's statement about the mezzanine safety issues. The insurance company's response came within 48 hours. Their claims investigator, Robert Liu, wanted to meet immediately. They're taking this seriously, Margaret told me over the phone. The potential clause violation is flagged as a serious exposure risk. What does that mean? It means their insurance company sees a clear pattern of negligence. If this goes to court, Pinnacle Industries could be liable for far more than $250,000. Punitive damages, additional compensation, legal fees, it adds up fast. Mr. Liu arrived at Margaret's office the next day, carrying a thick file. He was professional but clearly concerned. "Mr. Granger," he said, "I've reviewed your documentation. The evidence of prior warnings is compelling." He pulled out photographs of the collapsed mezzanine. Our engineers inspected the site. The failure points match exactly what you described in your emails to management. Margaret leaned forward. "So you agree this was preventable?" "Absolutely. Any reasonable person would have addressed these safety concerns immediately." Mr. Liu closed his file. "We'll be recommending that Pinnacle Industries settle this claim quickly. They have significant liability exposure." A week later, I received another courier delivery. This time, it was from Pinnacle Industries' legal department. They were offering an updated severance package, $75,000, plus continuation of my health insurance for 6 months. But there was a catch. The new agreement included an even more restrictive liability waiver and a non-disclosure agreement. I couldn't discuss the accident, the contract clause, or the circumstances of my termination with anyone, ever. Margaret read through the document carefully. "This is a trap," she said. "They're trying to buy your silence. $75,000 is more than the original offer. Walter, you're entitled to $250,000 under your contract. This is peanuts compared to what they legally owe you." She pointed to a clause buried in the fine print. "Look at this. If you sign, you waive all rights to future claims, including the negligence clause. They're trying to get you to forfeit $250,000 for $75,000. What if I don't sign? Then we proceed with the claim, and they know their insurance company will force them to pay the full amount." I thought about my bills, my medical expenses, the uncertain future ahead. $75,000 would help, but it wouldn't last long, and it wouldn't send a message about safety. "I'm not signing," I said firmly. "They need to learn that you can't put workers in danger and then throw them away." The following week brought an ugly surprise. Pinnacle Industries released an internal memo claiming that my accident was due to employee carelessness and failure to follow safety protocols. They were trying to blame me for the mezzanine collapse. Margaret received a copy from her contacts inside the company. She was furious. "They're claiming you weren't authorized to be on that platform," she said, reading from the memo. "That you ignored safety procedures." "That's completely false," I replied. "I was responding to a maintenance request. I have the work order. I pulled out my shift schedule and the original maintenance request. Look, I wasn't even supposed to be working that section that day. A worker complained about inventory discrepancies on the platform. My supervisor asked me to check it out." Margaret compared the documents. "So you were specifically assigned to inspect that area because of a complaint?" "Exactly. And I followed all safety protocols. Hard hat, safety vest, proper boots. The platform failed because of structural defects, not because of anything I did wrong." She made notes on her legal pad. "This actually makes their case worse. They assigned you to inspect a platform they knew was dangerous, despite multiple warnings about its condition." "They're desperate," I said. "They know they're in trouble. Desperate people make mistakes, And this memo is a big one. Margaret had a breakthrough the next day. She'd tracked down Mrs. Eleanor Walsh, a retired HR clerk who'd worked at Pinnacle Industries for 30 years before retiring 2 years ago. Mrs. Walsh invited us to her small apartment where she served tea and cookies like we were old friends. But she had something valuable, a complete archive of employment contracts from her decades at the company. I always kept copies of everything, she said, opening an old filing cabinet. Management changes, but the paperwork tells the real story. She pulled out a folder labeled W. Granger 2009 and handed it to Margaret. Inside was a photocopy of my original contract, identical to my copy. The company asked me to destroy old contracts when they updated the policies, Mrs. Walsh explained. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. These documents represent people's lives. Margaret examined the contract carefully. This confirms the negligence clause was part of Mr. Granger's original agreement. Mrs. Walsh nodded. I remember when they removed that clause, management said it was too expensive to maintain, but existing contracts were supposed to be honored. She prepared a notarized statement confirming the authenticity of my contract and explaining how the negligence clause had been removed from newer agreements, but remained valid for earlier employees. You're doing the right thing, she told me as we left. Workers deserve protection. Arlen called me personally the next morning. His tone was different, less arrogant, more nervous. Walter, I think we can work something out. The company is prepared to offer you a settlement. I'm listening. $75,000 plus will cover your medical expenses related to the accident. All you need to do is sign a simple agreement stating that the incident was an unfortunate accident, not the result of any negligence. I paused, letting him think I was considering it. And the non-disclosure agreement? Standard business practice. Nothing unusual. Arlen, let me ask you something. Have you found my original contract yet? Silence on the other end. The one from 2009 with Section 12B? Walter, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no such clause in any contract I've seen. That's because you've only been here 3 years, but the clause exists and it's legally binding. That's impossible. Check with your legal department. Ask them about contracts signed before 2012. Then call me back. I hung up, knowing he was probably panicking. $75,000 was about to seem like pocket change compared to what they actually owed me. While researching my case, I made a disturbing discovery. I found an old newspaper article about Tommy Rodriguez, a forklift operator who died in an accident at Pinnacle Industries 5 years ago. The company had claimed it was operator error, and his widow received only basic life insurance benefits. I remembered Tommy, a good man with 3 kids. His accident happened when a poorly maintained forklift's brakes failed. He'd complained about the brakes for weeks before the accident. I called his widow, Maria Rodriguez. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near her home. I always wondered if there was more to Tommy's accident, she said, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. He kept saying the forklifts weren't safe, but the company insisted it was his fault. I showed her a copy of my contract, pointing to Section 12B. Tommy was hired in 2008, I said. His contract would have had the same negligence clause. Maria's eyes filled with tears. You mean they owed us money for Tommy's death? If the company's negligence caused his accident, yes. And from what you're telling me about the brake problems, it sounds like it was. Maria wiped her eyes. They told me to be grateful for the life insurance. They made me feel like I was being greedy for asking questions. You weren't being greedy. You were being a good wife and mother. Is it too late to do anything? I don't know, but my attorney might be able to help. The arbitration hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at a downtown conference center. Margaret and I arrived early, carrying boxes of documentation. Across the table sat Arlen, Pinnacle Industries' head of legal affairs, and their outside counsel. The arbitrator, Judge Patricia Morris, called the session to order. She was a no-nonsense woman with decades of experience in labor disputes. Mr. Granger, she said, please state your claim. Margaret stood up. Your Honor, Mr. Granger is seeking compensation under Section 12B of his employment contract for injuries sustained due to company negligence. Pinnacle's lawyer immediately objected. Your Honor, there is no such clause in Mr. Granger's current contract. We're not talking about his current contract, Margaret replied. She handed Judge Morris a copy of my original agreement. This is Mr. Granger's contract from 2009, which remains in effect. Judge Morris read Section 12B aloud. Any employee injured due to company negligence while performing duties shall receive compensation of $250,000. The room went completely silent. I watched Arlen's face drain of color as he realized what he was hearing. Pinnacle's lawyer frantically whispered to Arlen, who shook his head in apparent disbelief. Your Honor, Margaret continued, we have extensive documentation proving the company ignored repeated warnings about the structural failure that injured Mr. Granger. Arlen looked like he was about to be sick. Word about the arbitration hearing spread quickly through Pinnacle Industries. By the end of the week, I was getting calls from former coworkers asking about the negligence clause. Tom Bradley, who'd worked in shipping for 14 years, called first. Walter, is it true about the old contracts? About the injury compensation? If you were hired before 2012, check your original contract, I told him. Look for Section 12B. Sarah Manning, a crane operator hired in 2010, called next. She'd been injured 2 years ago when a cable snapped, but the company claimed it was an act of God and offered minimal compensation. I kept my contract, she said, and I documented everything about that cable. The maintenance records show it should have been replaced months before it broke. One by one, longtime employees began digging through their old paperwork. Word spread through the warehouse, the loading docks, the maintenance shops. Everyone was talking about Granger's clause. Margaret's phone was ringing constantly. This is bigger than we expected, she told me. If several employees have valid claims under the negligence clause, Pinnacle Industries could be looking at millions in liability. Management was starting to panic. They realized they had exposure they'd never declared to their insurance company or their board of directors. They created this problem when they decided to hide the old contracts, Margaret said. Now it's coming back to haunt them. 3 days later, Margaret received an urgent call from Pinnacle Industries' board of directors. They wanted an emergency meeting to discuss my case and related matters. We met in the company's main conference room, the same room where I'd attended countless safety meetings over the years. Around the table sat 5 board members, the head of legal affairs, and a very uncomfortable-looking Arlen. Board Chairman Robert Hartley spoke first. Mr. Granger, we've reviewed your contract and the circumstances of your accident. We need to understand the full scope of our potential liability. Margaret opened her briefcase. Gentlemen, we've identified at least 12 employees with similar contracts and documented safety complaints that were ignored by management. The board members exchanged worried glances. What exactly are you saying? Asked board member Janet Phillips. I'm saying your company has a pattern of ignoring safety warnings and then firing or minimizing compensation for injured workers. And under the old contracts, that's very expensive negligence. Legal counsel whispered frantically to Chairman Hartley, who cleared his throat. We were not aware of the negligence clauses in pre-2012 contracts. Ignorance isn't a defense, Margaret replied. These are binding legal agreements. Your employees performed their duties in good faith, and your company failed to maintain a safe workplace despite repeated warnings. Arlen looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. The board ordered an immediate internal audit of all contracts signed before 2012, as well as a comprehensive review of safety reports and accident records. What they found was worse than they'd imagined. Margaret received a copy of the preliminary audit findings. Over 40 employees had contracts with the negligence clause. More than half had filed safety complaints that were ignored or dismissed by management. Several had been injured and received minimal compensation based on the assumption that their contracts didn't include the clause. This is a corporate nightmare, Margaret told me over the phone. They have massive undisclosed liability. The audit also revealed that safety shortcuts and deleted records were standard practice under Arlen's management. Digital maintenance logs had been routinely cleaned up to remove evidence of complaints and warnings. But they hadn't counted on old-school workers like me who kept paper records. The insurance company was furious when they learned about the scope of potential claims, They'd been insuring Pinnacle Industries based on incomplete information about liability exposure. The board is scrambling, Margaret said. They're facing potential lawsuits from employees, insurance companies, and possibly shareholders who weren't told about this liability. What happens to Arlen? Read tomorrow's company newsletter. I think you'll be interested. The next morning's company-wide email was brief but telling. Arlen Blackwood was being reassigned to a position in compliance and regulatory affairs, effective immediately. He would no longer have authority over operations, safety, or staffing decisions. Everyone in the warehouse knew what this meant. Arlen had been demoted and stripped of real power. His new job was basically shuffling paperwork and attending meetings nobody cared about. Dave Martinez called me, laughing. "Walter, did you see the news? Arlen's been sent to corporate Siberia." "I saw it. How's everyone taking it?" "The guys are calling it Granger's revenge. Morale is higher than it's been in years." Sarah Manning sent me a text. "Heard about Arlen. Good riddance. That man never cared about worker safety." I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. I hadn't wanted to destroy anyone's career, but Arlen had brought this on himself by ignoring safety warnings and treating workers as disposable. The new operations manager was Linda Garcia, a 20-year company veteran who'd worked her way up from the warehouse floor. Her first memo announced a comprehensive safety review and promised that all worker concerns would be taken seriously. "Things might actually get better," Dave said. "Garcia knows what it's like to do the actual work." A week later, Pinnacle Industries made their final offer. Through their attorneys, they agreed to pay me the full $250,000 specified in my contract, plus complete medical coverage for my back injury and restoration of my full pension benefits. But they tried one last time to include a non-disclosure agreement. Margaret and I met to discuss the offer. "They're desperate to keep this quiet," she said. "Bad publicity about safety violations and hidden contract clauses could hurt their reputation and stock price. What do you think about the NDA? Legally, they can't force you to sign it. You're entitled to the money with or without your silence." I thought about Maria Rodriguez and the other workers who'd been shortchanged. I thought about my former colleagues who still worked in that warehouse every day. "I won't sign an NDA," I said firmly. "Other people need to know about their rights." Margaret smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The next day, she sent Pinnacle Industries our counteroffer. Full payment as specified in the contract, with no restrictions on my right to discuss the case or the negligence clause. Their response came within hours. "Accepted." "They're so eager to settle your case, they'll take any terms," Margaret said. "They're terrified about the other potential claims." "Good. Maybe they'll think twice before putting profits ahead of safety." Before I deposited the settlement check, I wrote a detailed letter to my former coworkers. I explained the negligence clause, how to check their contracts, and the importance of documenting safety concerns. I also included Margaret's contact information for anyone who needed legal advice. I gave copies to Dave Martinez and Sarah Manning, asking them to share the information with longtime employees who might have similar contracts. The letter spread through the warehouse like wildfire. Workers huddled around lockers and break room tables, reading copies and discussing their own experiences with ignored safety complaints. Tom Bradley found his original contract and discovered he was covered by the negligence clause. His back injury from a poorly maintained conveyor belt suddenly looked like a valid claim. Sarah Manning contacted Margaret about her cable accident. With proper legal representation, her minimal settlement could become significant compensation. Even newer employees were inspired to start documenting their safety concerns properly, knowing that workers' rights were being taken seriously for the first time in years. "You started something, Walter," Dave told me. "People aren't afraid to speak up anymore." The warehouse culture was changing. Workers were standing up for themselves, and management was finally listening. Over the following weeks, several former workers stepped forward with their own claims under the negligence clause. Margaret's office became a hub of activity as she reviewed contracts and documentation. Maria Rodriguez's case was particularly strong. Tommy's forklift accident involved equipment that had documented maintenance issues, and his contract included the negligence clause. Margaret filed a claim on behalf of his estate. Sarah Manning's cable accident was clearly the result of deferred maintenance that violated company safety protocols. Her original settlement was less than $10,000. Under the negligence clause, she was entitled to $250,000. Tom Bradley's conveyor belt injury happened after he'd filed multiple maintenance requests that were ignored. His case was solid. By the end of the month, 8 former employees had filed claims totaling over $2 million in compensation under the negligence clause. Pinnacle Industries' stock price dropped when news of the potential liability leaked to financial media. The board was furious that they'd been blindsided by these contracts. "It's beautiful justice," Margaret told me. For years they saved money by ignoring safety concerns and minimizing injury compensation. Now they're paying the real price. The insurance company was considering dropping Pinnacle Industries as a client unless they implemented comprehensive safety reforms and proper contract disclosure procedures. 6 months after my accident, something unexpected happened. I received a call from Linda Garcia, the new operations manager. "Walter, I know this might sound strange, but I'd like to offer you a position with the company." I was stunned. "A position? Head of Safety and Compliance. We need someone with your experience and integrity to rebuild our safety culture." I thought about the offer. The idea of returning to Pinnacle Industries felt surreal. What would this position involve? Complete authority over safety protocols, maintenance scheduling, and worker training. You'd report directly to me, with full support from the board. And Walter, anyone can come to you with safety concerns, no questions asked. The irony was perfect. The man they'd fired for reporting safety problems was being asked to return as the person in charge of safety. "I'd want guarantees," I said, "in writing about worker protection and my authority to shut down unsafe operations." "Absolutely. After what happened, the board understands that safety can't be compromised." I accepted the position with a significant salary increase and a guarantee that safety would never be subordinated to production quotas. On my first day back, the warehouse crew gave me a standing ovation. Word had spread that Granger was back and that things were really going to change. 2 weeks into my new job, I was attending a leadership meeting when Chairman Hartley made an announcement that shocked everyone. Effective immediately, Arlen Blackwood is no longer employed by Pinnacle Industries. The room fell silent. Arlen, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner taking notes about compliance procedures, looked up in surprise. "Mr. Blackwood, you're terminated for cause, specifically for deliberately concealing safety hazards and destroying maintenance records." The board had discovered that Arlen hadn't just ignored safety warnings, he'd actively deleted digital records to hide evidence of problems. The mezzanine collapse was just the tip of the iceberg. "Security will escort you out," Hartley continued. "Your termination is effective immediately." Arlen gathered his belongings in stunned silence. As security led him to the elevator, he glanced back at me with a look of pure defeat. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. I just felt relieved that workers would finally be safe. After Arlen left, Hartley turned to me. "Walter, I want you to know that safety is now our top priority. You have complete authority to implement whatever changes are necessary." The meeting ended with plans for a company-wide safety overhaul, new equipment, additional training, and a zero-tolerance policy for ignoring worker concerns. A year later, I stood in the same spot where the mezzanine had collapsed, watching workers move safely across a completely rebuilt platform. The new structure was over-engineered, stronger than it needed to be, but nobody was taking chances anymore. The warehouse had transformed. New safety equipment, updated maintenance protocols, and a culture where workers felt comfortable reporting problems. Accident rates dropped to the lowest levels in company history. My safety office was always busy. Workers stopped by regularly to discuss concerns, knowing they'd be taken seriously. I'd implemented a system where every safety report was acknowledged within 24 hours and addressed within a week. Granger's warning had become company legend, a reminder of what happened when safety was ignored. New employees heard the story during orientation, learning that safety concerns were not just welcomed, but required. Maria Rodriguez received her settlement, using the money to start a college fund for her children. Sarah Manning bought a new house and sent me a thank you card with a photo of her family. Dave Martinez came out of retirement to work part-time in my safety department, helping train new workers on proper procedures. I kept my original contract framed on my office wall, right next to my new job description. Sometimes younger workers asked about it, and I'd tell them the whole story. The best part? I'd received dozens of letters from workers at other companies who'd heard about the negligence clause and checked their own contracts. Several found similar provisions and successfully claimed compensation for injuries their companies thought they could ignore. As I locked my office that evening, I reflected on the journey from a hospital bed to this moment. They tried to throw me away, but I'd come back stronger. And now, no worker at Pinnacle Industries would ever be ignored again.